Hello everyone and welcome to part 2, where I'm going to screen share now my methodology from a previous paper that I've written. I've color coded it just like I did with the introduction section as well. As you can see here, these are areas which I spoke about in part 1. Now I'm going to scroll down, show you the methodology and elaborate from part 1. Okay, so you've got your title here, methodology. Participants would be the first thing that you have. So as you can see here, I put the number of people in there, so 15 participants. I put the age, I put the mean standard deviation in there, make sure you do that. I haven't put anything to do with height, weight, anything like that, because this isn't a physical laboratory study, it's about cognitive function. So what I've focused on is normal to corrected vision. They're going to be looking at a computer screen, so I'm going to make sure that's very clear. I'm saying that they go to a certain university, and if you remember from part 1, I spoke about how you recruited people. Mine's very brief. It doesn't always have to be that brief. If yours is a bit more wordy, you need to expand a bit more, go ahead, but keep it short. And then I mentioned as well ethical approval. I put this within my participants section. So I've said here, ethical approval of all procedures was obtained from the university and the ethics committee. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to how I did the study. So this is the procedures section. And what you'll see is some key details about some of the basic stuff. But if you go through it, if you pause it at certain areas and read some of it, you'll see the tests that I use, I don't go into great detail yet. Okay, so I'll go through some of the stuff that I've put in blue. What you can do when you start off your methodology is say what type of study it was. So mine is, as you can see here, randomized counterbalanced order. Don't need to worry too much about what that means. But whatever yours is, if it's a double-blind study, for example, like a nutrition study, mention that. Okay, so I've also spoken about stuff participants have been told to do before they get to the laboratory. So for example here, they can't have caffeine 24 hours before a study. So if there's any instructions that you've given to your participants before they come to the lab, put that in. Remember, it's all in chronological order, so this is the stuff before they come into the lab, and then you move on. So I've put here as well, informed consent. This is either before or when a person first comes into the lab, they fill in a form, put that in. And then you don't need to know all my key details of the study, but I'm just going to hover over some of the stuff that's just very precise. So for example, I'd use this joypad within my study. It was 8 centimeters away from the edge of the computer. You say these very basic elements in key detail though, because if you want someone to replicate your study, they need to know all these details. So I'll keep going forward. They did 12 trials of a certain test. Again, you don't need to worry about what tests are. 60 seconds here. So if you remember from part 1, I said the basic stuff within your procedures. They did this test, they did that test. It lasted this long. What else have I got here? They had a rest period at the end. And what I will say though, actually, before I move on, is this bit here. So I've said they do the modified Stroop task and they do the CRTT. Don't worry about what that means. But you see here, I've not gone into great detail about what they are. I'm going to save that for this next bit, which is where you break down each component in separate paragraphs. So I'm going to skip this one. It's quite wordy. Don't worry about this one too much. I'm only going to focus on one in the interest of time. But one thing that you can take away from this bit is I'm going to use a diagram for this one. It's very wordy, and in brackets at the end, I've put figure 1, or you could write see figure 1. So if you feel yours is quite wordy, you're reading it back thinking, well, maybe I should put a picture in here to make it clearer, do it. Always put that below the paragraph. So I wouldn't put this at the start, put it below the paragraph and always label it as well. So you can see here, I've put figure 1 dash name of the test. And then I'm going to show you now just one paragraph out of all of these tests. So here I'm going to speak about the Stroop test. Now, as mentioned in the procedures, I'm not explaining in great detail what it is. I'm just saying in the procedures section, they did the Stroop task. Here is where I explain exactly what happens. So you see here that I've highlighted the last few seconds, 4 words coming up on the screen, one at a time. To make it harder, this was used, I used this to make it a bit more difficult. It was translated into German, because all the students that did it were German speakers, and they completed 900 trials. So there may be some element within your procedures where you give a bit of detail, but the real core detail goes into its own section. So make sure your procedures isn't really long. You have to make sure you wait, get to this bit here, and have your subheadings for each test that you use. Control conditions as well. If you have a control condition, make sure you have a short paragraph where you explain what the control condition was. This is a visual analog scale, so this is another subsection. I won't go into great detail because it's the same principle for each one. You just give a breakdown of what the person had to do within this test and what this test means. Okay, so before I move on to this, let's just clarify what we've got so far. So we've got your participants. Remember this bit, keep it very simple. How many people, age, height and weight if it's relevant. Moving on to procedures, remember it's just they did this test, then they did that test, then they did this. It's just a chronological order of what happened, not huge detail of how you conduct the test, just the basics. Then you got your subsections where you break down each test that you did. As you can see here, a lot more detail now. You can even use some diagrams. That's what we've got so far. And then you get to the end, the final part, what stats did you run? Now this is quite wordy, this is a PhD level paper and it's, even I'm reading this back after a few months trying to work out what's going on. So don't worry too much about word for word what's happening here. What I'd say is, as long as you're stating the test that you're using, as I've got here coloured, I'm basically saying I used this test, I used that test, I did this. If you can take anything away from this, your structure should be something like this sentence. So if you're going to take anything from this sentence is okay. In order to understand the association between this and this, the bit that's in the coloured section, this test was used. So if you remember from part 1, I said, in order to measure this, this test was used. And I would do that sentence structure over and over again. So there's lots of different things that you're going to measure within your statistical analysis section. Just say it in that order. In order to measure this, we use this. Keep that really, really simple. Okay, so that was my very brief video on doing the methodology. I'll just leave this bit here very, very quickly again, explain. So who are your participants? How did you do the study? Then you go into your tests, and then you speak about the statistics that you ran. I strongly recommend that you read journal articles. So if you're doing a lab report about caffeine, go and find a paper on caffeine that's really similar. Go and read the methodology to have a full understanding of what the structure should be. Okay, if you have any more questions about a methodology, get in touch with me on Instagram at Sports Science Hacks. Okay, thanks for tuning in, and I'll speak to you again soon.